Welcome back, everyone. We are about to start our first expert panel. Sina Fazalpour is going to be the moderator of this panel. He's an assistant professor of philosophy and computer science at Northeastern University. His research spans the field of philosophy and ethics of AI, cognitive science, social philosophy, and philosophy of science. Sina has been a visiting AI fellow at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, since 2022, part of the inaugural cohort of Schmidt Sciences AI 2050 Early Career Fellows, and the 2020-2021 Council Fellow on the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Data Policy. He is also one of the 2025 ACM FACT Conference Program Chairs. Please join me in welcoming Sina to the stage.
Well, thanks, Oda. It's great to be here, great to be back at CMU and seeing some familiar faces and hearing a very exciting keynote fireside chat. As I was listening to the fireside chat, I was thrilled to hear many of the issues that I'm sure that during this panel with our excellent expert panelists, we will be touching upon again. And so there's lots of building on the previous discussion that I'm very looking forward to. So this panel is about the ethical issues surrounding generative AI, particularly issues that are new or emerging with respect to generative AI as opposed to more conventional predictive algorithms. The way that the panel works is that each of the panelists will come and gives a 10-minute, roughly, a slide presentation of issues that they think are very important. And then afterwards, I have prepared a set of questions about ethics, issues around ethical governance, and issues around human and organizational factors that are needed for ethical governance. And then during that time, you are very highly encouraged to send your questions to Slido. Is this the... Do we have the information? So the information will be there. So you will be able to send your question to the Slido, and then I will be asking those questions as we discuss the issues with our panelists. So without further delay, our first presentation and our first expert panelist is Atusa Kasirzadeh. Atusa recently joined Carnegie Mellon University as a tenure-track assistant professor with joint affiliations in philosophy and software and societal systems departments. Previously, Atusa was a visiting faculty at Google Research, a Chancellor's Fellow, and research lead at the University of Edinburgh's Center for Technomoral Futures, a group research lead at the Alan Turing Institute, and a Governance of AI Fellow at Oxford. Atusa is a Schmidt Sciences AI 2050 Early Career Fellow and a steering committee member for the ACM FACT Conference. So please join me in welcoming Atusa.
All right. Hello, everyone. Very excited to be here. So I'm going to talk today about risk governance for general purpose AI. And in particular, I'm going to share some lessons that I've learned from working in industry, in particular Google DeepMind and Google Research, academia, and with various think tanks in the US around the questions of AI risk governance. Okay, so we have a lot of different types of frameworks, various different jurisdictions, various different companies develop these kinds of AI risk governance frameworks, and they come under a variety of different names. But I think there are four core concepts, four core practices that are common to all of these governance frameworks. So I'm going to talk about them kind of like briefly, and hopefully I'm going to motivate you that these are the core really important aspects of any governance frameworks. Then I'm going to share with you some perspectives about the first aspect or first element of this risk governance framework, in particular risk conceptualization and risk identification, and I'm going to share some open problems around this whole practice. Okay, so general purpose AI risk identification and conceptualization. Now, why should we care about risk identification and conceptualization? Because we want to measure risk, because we want to evaluate risk, and then we want to manage and mitigate risk. So we might want to develop new technical tools in order to make sure that the risk of harm from general purpose AI systems are minimized. And to be also very clear, by risk during the rest of the talk, I mean risk of harm from general purpose AI systems. Okay, so here is a list of various different efforts again, an illustrative list of various different efforts that a variety of different institutions, researchers developed over the past couple of years, let's say from 2020. All of these efforts try to kind of like make sense of the classes, the categories, the types of risk of harm that a society, an individual, or an organization could kind of experience. I think in my view, the first paper that really brought attention to the public in relation to the risk of harm from general purpose AI models is this very famous paper on the dangers of stochastic parrots. Can large language models be too big? And this paper is famous for a variety of different reasons, but it was the first paper that was published in 2020, early 2021, and the researchers from academia and the ethics team at Google tried to kind of like chart the possible dangers or possible harms that language models in particular, as one instance of generative purpose AI, can pose to society. So here the authors gave a general characterization of these different types of risks. And then after this paper came out, like public discussed it, then other researchers tried to kind of like bring more fine-grained characterizations to these risks. So one of these efforts is the taxonomy of risk posed by language models that we co-authored with almost 20 researchers from a variety of different disciplines at Google DeepMind. We started working on this paper in 2020, and we shared the results in 2021. And here we developed a very detailed, refined categorizations of risk of harm from general purpose models. And for each category of risk, we identified whether we have mitigation tools or not, what are the mitigation tools that researchers should develop. And this was one of the most interesting kind of like interdisciplinary research efforts that I was engaged in, because we didn't want to just tell the people, look, there's these categories of risk, just like go have fun with them. We wanted to kind of really identify, in collaboration with AI researchers, what are these risks that AI researchers cannot handle? What new tools we have to develop? How can we leverage AI systems to mitigate the risk of harm? So after that, then a lot of researchers tried to kind of like chart the taxonomy of risk from various different modalities of general purpose AI models, like text-to-image models, like audio generators. And then more recently, people started talking about systemic risk from AI, what types of risk AI kind of poses to various different systems, catastrophic risk from AI, and various different people started putting out papers around extreme risk from AI, dangerous risk from AIs, and then on the very, extreme side of the risk spectrum, people started talking about existential risk from AI or extinction risk from AI. So what we have when I look back at the past 5 years in the space of like generative AI risk, you see a variety of different names associated, variety of different risks, and we have some frameworks for some tools for mitigating some of this risk, but still the space is quite fragmented. It's not, for example, clear how the risk of harm that we charted in taxonomy of risk posed by language models connects to systemic risk, which is an emerging category of risk that people are talking about. Or when we have multiple AI agents that are collaborating together to perform a specific task, what are the emerging risks that arises in that space? Okay. So here, just to give more like a concrete kind of flavor for these types of risks, I want to share with you, I don't know why the numbers here are messed up, but my slides, yeah, there are like 1 to 6 different categories of risks, and so they're like discrimination, hate speech, exclusion, misinformation, malicious use, human-computer interaction, user harm, information hazards, and environmental and socioeconomic harms. And again, the idea here is that if we know and understand these different types of harms, then we would learn how to kind of mitigate them. And we would maybe start new research projects to explore new ways, whether institutional, whether computational, to mitigate this risk of harms. Okay, so risk identification and conceptualization is the first core step in mitigating risk of harm from general purpose AI systems. And I want to say a little bit about the other third steps in AI risk governance, which are, okay, let's assume we have a great comprehensive list of risk of harms, class of risk of harms from AI systems. Now, how we have to evaluate them, how we have to manage them, how we have to mitigate them, and how are we communicating this risk to public? Actually, that's quite important because each different entity, each different institution is working under different incentive structures, and as a result, they focus on a particular set of risks. So as a public, for various different citizens, when, let's say, a company is sharing their perspectives about risk management, is that like enough? Is that sufficient? Or are they excluding some types of risk? So risk communication is quite important. And on this, I want to kind of like draw a distinction between two different ways of measuring and managing risk. One of them are just like, okay, we're gonna let the companies or the entities that are developing these systems to govern the risk of harm. And the other one is that there should be external audits, whether enforced by governments, whether enforced by third parties, for like oversight into what these systems are doing or companies are doing. And there are various different kinds of general frameworks. One of them is risk management framework that Sina has contributed heavily to the development of that framework. Another one is, for example, this risk-based kind of classification of different severity of risk of harm from AI system, but EU AI Act, and they come at various different levels of generality, various different levels of specification. And I want to leave you with one, I think, very important question that we haven't discussed much, and I think in the next years to come, we need to have a much more mature understanding of this question, and that is the idea that, okay, risk frameworks are great, they're necessary, but by no means they are sufficient. When we have a risk framework, then we need to enforce them. And depending on various different standards that we put in place for justifications of thresholds that we define, for accountability mechanisms, etc., we are going to have different types of enforcements. So the question of what are the measurement challenges when we want to enforce and implement AI risk governance frameworks are quite important. And I hope that in the next years, we're gonna see much more mature analysis of this question. Yeah, thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Atusa. So our next speaker, or our next expert panelist, is David Danks, who's a very familiar face around this area. David is a professor of data science, philosophy, and policy and affiliate faculty in computer science and engineering at the University of California, San Diego. David has examined the ethical, psychological, and policy issues around AI and robotics in many different domains, including transportation, healthcare, privacy, and security. David has served on the advisory boards for various organizations, including the National AI Advisory Committee, NIAC, Computer Science and Telecommunication Board, National Academies, and the Partnership to Advance Responsible Technology part. Please join me in welcoming David.
Thanks so much, Sina, and It is definitely a real pleasure to be here with, as Sina mentioned, a whole lot of familiar and very friendly faces. I spent almost 2 decades here at Carnegie Mellon, so it's really a pleasure to get to come back. I should also make sure to say, since Sina mentioned NIAC, that I'm here in my personal capacity, and nothing that I say should be interpreted to reflect the views of the National AI Advisory Committee. So what I wanted to do was take a little bit of time to talk about a few issues around harm and governance that sort of drill down a bit in terms of distinctive issues that arise when we think about generative AI systems in particular. So here I'm going to be trying to contrast some of the issues that arise specifically with things like everything from large language models to text to video to all of the various systems that we've become acutely familiar with since they burst into the public consciousness in 2022. So let me do a deeper dive on 2 kinds of harms in particular that I think distinctively arise when we're looking at these kinds of systems. So the first is that historically there's been a distinction that often gets drawn when we think about harms between what we call allocative harms and representational harms. The basic idea is that an allocative harm, imagine you apply for a loan and you unjustly are rejected for the loan because of an AI system. That would be an allocative harm. There's something that you had an entitlement to and you failed to get. Representational harms are different. They're not about the resources that come your way or are denied to you by virtue of an AI system. Representational harms are rather about the kinds of changes that occur psychologically in individuals or communities on the basis of what it is that they see themselves represented as. Okay, so if you think about the loan example, it is a certain representational harm that occurs. I now think of myself as a less credit-worthy person. That's the representational harm that occurs to me when I'm unjustly denied a loan. But in general, this distinction between allocative and representational harms historically gets introduced so that people can say, but we're not going to talk about the representational, because that's difficult. The representational harms are hard to measure. They're hard to think about. They're about changes in people's minds. They're not the sort of thing that I can just look on a balance sheet and figure out whether I've allocated my loans appropriately across racial or other demographic groups. And so one of the things that we've been engaged in over the last couple of years, and the we here is in particular work with an outstanding PhD student, Jennifer Chien, is trying to come up with methods for actually measuring representational harms, specifically because these are in many cases the harms that we should worry about when we think about generative AI. When we think about generative AI systems, representational harms, the person who generates images of scientists and all they see are white and Asian males, the person who wants to get a summary of who are the leading, to use an example from one of our papers, the leading world soccer players, and all they see are men. Right? These kinds of things that lead people to think, maybe I'm not prepared to go into that job category. Maybe that's not for me. Or the people where every representation they see is of a black individual is of them in a threatening stance, which is true of some of the image generation systems, that they default to black individuals being represented in more threatening poses. And so therefore they think those people are scary, the othering that occurs. Those are all representational harms. And the challenge for, I think, many people in computer science is that those who are trained primarily in computer science, this goes to one of DJ's points earlier about learning to speak different languages, is they think, wow, people's brains and minds, that's scary and squishy. I don't want to do that. Except there are people, we call them social psychologists, who've spent decades trying to understand self-representation, other representation, and measurements for it. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do, and that I think I'm looking forward to perhaps being able to push into some of the industry collaborations we have, is exactly to say that representational harms should not be introduced purely to be ignored. They need to be introduced so that we can actually measure, mitigate, monitor for their occurrence. Okay? Another example of a distinctive harm that I think arises with generative AI systems has to do with one of the features that we don't necessarily like to talk about as much because we don't always know what to do with it, but that is that these systems are fundamentally what we call stochastic, which is to say give them the exact same input in what seem to be exactly the same context and you will get different outputs. Right? They are not deterministic. They don't give us the same answer every single time. Right? And in fact, some systems, the OpenAI O series, for example, leverage that stochasticity for improved performance. They take advantage of it. They make it a feature, not a bug. But the problem is that it's actually very hard to think about how to trust a stochastic system. If the thing isn't going to do the same thing every single time, why should I trust that it's actually going to be useful and support my values? Now, as soon as I say that, you should immediately go, well, but wait a second. Imagine I've got a self-driving car. In some sense, it's stochastic. I don't know if it's going to be here or an inch over in the lane, and I don't care, as long as that inch over doesn't move it over the dotted dashed white line into another car. Right? So what we've been developing is a way of thinking about this harm, the fact that it's much harder to trust stochastic systems. We've been thinking about methods to try to respond to that, to instead say what matters is whether these systems are supporting our values. Now again, values is a sort of squishy term. It doesn't sound like computer science. And so the effort that's really needed in order to, I think, advance work on these distinctive issues that arise, at least in terms of the research arm, is really thinking about ways to connect values, as they're understood in ethics, sociology, and economics, and other fields, into technical constraints. And there's, I think, some interesting work happening there. But that leads to, of course, the question of what kinds of responses we should have. And I mean, I think this has already been signaled that normal AI governance doesn't work very well for generative AI systems. And I think that's because there are the kinds of information asymmetries that arise in things like representational harms. In most cases of representational harms, I don't know I've been harmed. But the company is able to find that out. If we think about intellectual property issues, the privacy infringements that occur, I have no idea which of my online writings might have been scraped. Well, they have all been scraped, but I might have, which other parts of my life have been ingested into a generative AI system? I don't know. That's an information asymmetry. OpenAI, Anthropic, they know what they've ingested, but I don't. And so normal AI governance usually assumes that there's not a strong information asymmetry. We assume that we know when we've been harmed, but that isn't always going to be the case with generative AI. Similarly, the measurement demands are much higher with generative AI. We need to, if we want to trust these systems, we're going to need to run billions of instances of them to try to find out how they behave under a wide range of circumstances. We can't just put them in a little sandbox and see how they behave. It's got to be a very robust and open sandbox. It's going to be the kind of thing that at least was and maybe someday will be developed under the auspices of the ARIA program that NIST was building out, though I'm not sure that it's going to happen in the next 4 years. So what should we do instead? So with some collaborators, including original ideas that started with Alex London here at CMU, we've been exploring frameworks for dynamic certification, dynamic governance. And so I just want to put up a little bit of eye candy, because at this point in the day, I know people are already getting a little bit sleepy. It's not quite the eye candy it was supposed to look like. Not sure what happened, but we've been developing this framework and actually putting it to work with colleagues at University of Texas at Austin on being able to basically have formal models of socio-technical systems. So the broader environments in which we're deploying things, in particular aerial delivery robots, we have been working to be able to express the relevant constraints in open, actual world environments in formal ways so we can formally demonstrate the conditions under which the system is going to perform well, when it's not, and most importantly, when we don't know how it's going to perform. Because oftentimes uncertainty is the most important thing we can point out. So with that, I'll just say thank you and bring back up Sina.
Thanks, David. So finally, our third expert panelist, Francesca Rossi, is the IBM AI Ethics Global Leader and an IBM Fellow. Francesca works at the IBM T.J. Watson Research Lab. At the height of a 22-year-old academic career, Francesca took a leave of absence from her tenured full professorship in computer science at the University of Padua in Italy to explore new ways of thinking about these issues. So rather than seeking evidence to reinforce what she already knew, Francesca spent a year at Harvard University's Radcliffe Institute, where she was challenged by her distinguished counterparts in arts and humanities. After that sabbatical year, Francesca joined IBM Research. While continuing to do AI research, she has also started to work on AI ethics within the company and also with many other stakeholders in the context like the UN, the Partnership on AI, the OCDE, the IEEE. Francesca has just ended her term as the president of AAAI, the Association for the Advancement of AI, where she led a study to reflect about the future of AI research. Please join me in welcoming Francesca.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So I'll speak a little bit about AI ethics, the new issues, evolving issues, amplified issues with the new kind of AI that we are using right now. But then I will also reflect upon the governance, and I will mention a little bit about that presidential panel on the future of AI research, because I think it's relevant to this discussion. So in terms of course, generative AI, we have all been saying many things about the new risks. Some of them are new, some of them are amplified. At IBM recently, like already almost more than a year ago, we published a report that you can see here between the plants. You can see the link listing all these risks that we could identify, and really identifying them as standard, meaning that more or less they are the same risks that we already knew how to identify and address and mitigate as for more traditional machine learning approaches. Some of them we identified as amplified, and some of them as completely new. And for each risk, we try to also write down in this report what is really serious about the risk, so what is the relevance of this risk in the various cases, or what risk has already been concretized, so even media coverage that shows that this risk has been actually been concretely happening in real life, and also some mitigation patterns. And this report, within few months, also became not just a report, but also was included into our platform. It's called Watson X, in the governance part of the platform, in the so-called what we call the AI Risk Atlas. That is something that our clients can use to search the risk, to understand what is relevant to their solution, and so on. So that shows already that these discussions about AI ethics risks, they also go into platforms and products, so they have to be integrated into what actually is used and built in terms of AI solutions. But now let me go to the next wave already, with this idea of agentic AI. Because LLMs bring about many amplified risks, as we discussed already, but now they can be connected to tools and agents, and we can delegate things to do to these so-called agents. Now, what is new about these agents? Because in some sense, AI research has been talking about AI agents and working on AI agents for forever. So why now there is this new interest into AI agents? Because now the context in which systems are working is a little bit different. So first of all, AI agents are called like that because they have the agency to act in the real world. But they also have other kinds of agencies. The agency to select which resources, which tools, which other software agents to use to perform and execute certain actions. So this second action, this second agency, is what makes them different. Because now you have an open-ended multi-agent system, multi-LLM tool agent system. And this open-endedness, which is different from what we had in AI earlier, where you could design the system and understand which were the pieces of the system, how they were interacting with each other, whether you could trust each one of the pieces. Now, instead, an LLM can connect to a tool that can be found on the web and maybe is available today and not available tomorrow. And who knows who built that tool, whether you can trust it, and so on. So this open open-endedness is really bringing about some consequences, like, again, opaqueness. So you don't know what other pieces are there and what their properties are, the complexity of this multi-agent system, and the fact, of course, that they take actions, and actions can be non-reversible. So then you can make even harmful action, and you cannot reverse it. So there are many amplified risks, as you can imagine, in this new framework of agentic AI systems. For example, the fairness and value alignment, which are already well understood, but now they can also creep into the way these systems are going to choose other agents and other tools. They can choose it in a biased way. They can choose it in a way that is not aligned to some relevant values. There is an issue of trust. You can over-trust or under-trust this system just because you don't know what the other pieces are bringing about, and also because trust is not a compositional property. You can trust each piece of the system, and the whole system may be non-trustworthy because of the way the pieces interconnect between them. So besides these amplified risks, there are also a lot of amplified challenges, like how do you evaluate these systems? How do you mitigate the risks? How do you reproduce the properties of the risk? How do you make this system transparent? How do you assign responsibilities, so who is accountable? And how do you test for compliance? All these are questions that we always ask, whatever the AI system, but in these open-ended agentic AI scenarios are even more challenging. Sina mentioned this report that was recently published a week ago, that AAAI published about the future of AI research. And I want to mention it is because it's not just talking about what AI research is about, but also where AI research is done more and more in companies compared to previously. So what's the role of academia? How research is done, more and more evaluating emergent properties rather than designing a system with certain predefined properties, as well as the global context, the global scenario. So all these dimensions that are not the what of AI research, but there are many chapters about that as well, say reasoning and agentic AI and so on, but also proper dimensions that are around. So these are the chapters, and you can. The last thing that I want to do here is really to share some lessons learned in operationalizing AI ethics and building a governance around it. That's what I do at IBM, together with many others, of course. And so some lessons learned over time, of course, because you don't learn a lesson, you don't build a perfect framework at the beginning. So the first thing is really that you want the whole company to be part of this AI ethics and governance framework, not just one business unit. Otherwise, that business unit will have challenges in impacting the rest of the company. The second one is to build a governance body. We have what we call the AI ethics board with the power to make decisions, not just as an advisory body that says, oh, you should do that, but then the team goes and does whatever they think better. Third thing is really to build software tools like we built to address and mitigate the risks, but also think that these software tools are just the first step. You also have to build all the pieces around risk assessment, evaluation, the governance, the internal processes. Another thing is that of course, regulation compliance is something that in every company is done, but this is not around AI ethics and governance. The AI ethics and governance goes beyond regulation compliance. You don't wait for the European AI Act to be in effect to then say, oh, what should I do to be compliant? You proactively define your AI ethics and governance framework. The fifth one is the most important one in my view and in what I learned. So to integrate all these governance dimensions. Without integration, that we didn't have integration a few years ago, adoption was very minimal. And so, because people had already a lot of processes, internal processes to follow, and we were adding another one, the AI ethics, risk assessment, and so on. And so they were kind of resisting in following an additional process. So now an integrated governance process really is much, much better. Another thing is that, of course, it's important to have AI research inside the company, because that is what builds the tools, understands the issues from the technical point of view, builds also innovation in mitigating the risks. And then, of course, another important thing is to partner with many other stakeholders. Like we work, as we mentioned, with the Partnership on AI, with the OECD, with the World Economic Forum. So work and talk with other stakeholders, not just other companies, which is also useful to share best practices, but also with civil society organizations, with academia, with many others, policymakers, and so on. And then the last one is really to be very agile in your governance framework. Technologies, as we've seen, changes rapidly. You have to be very rapid in changing the AI ethics, not the principles, not the values, but the AI ethics and governance framework has to be agile enough to rapidly identify the new risk, embed them into the internal processes as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Francesca. So just a reminder that you can submit your questions to Slido, and hopefully I will see them on this. If not, somebody will wave and then I will notice it. So thank you all for the presentation. I think it was great for setting the stage. I think it might be good to, in moving to talking about ethical issues surrounding generative AI, maybe kind of reflecting back on the field of responsible AI or trustworthy AI or AI ethics in the past decade or so, and thinking about what, from your perspective, like kind of from a broad perspective, what has the field achieved so far in this past decade? And what are the major achievements? And also, what are the major gaps?
Okay, great. So I think, in a nutshell, I think the field of AI ethics has made a lot of progress. So any topic in AI ethics that you mentioned, let's say transparency, accountability, fairness, justice, we've done so much research across a variety of different institutions, various different types of researchers, to kind of like address the complexities around addressing those types of terms. For example, like the topic of fairness in relation to machine learning systems was brought into attention by some journalists, like in early 2010s. And then researchers, computer scientists started like developing various different metrics, various different theorems, impossibility theorems. And then philosophers, social scientists started saying, well, this is not exactly what we mean by fairness. This is not exactly what the field of economics has thought about fairness. How should we account for context, etc. Fairness being one example. So I think we've developed like a lot of, let's say, socio-technical, multidisciplinary understandings of these topics, and then throughout the way, the importance of multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary research has become more and more clear. And so then, did you also ask what we have not achieved, or just what we have achieved?
What do you think is a major gap that
Okay.
we have not achieved?
Okay, so I think one of the very hard and important questions that we haven't discussed much is like, okay, when we have this multidisciplinary perspective, multi-stakeholder perspectives, who is going to make the last decision? How much weight we are going to give to the perspectives of all of the advisory panels? Is it enough just to talk to other people, or do we need to have mechanism to trace that the perspectives of those people are really like in force? And I think we really need to make much more progress on that front.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly endorse everything Atusa just said. I think included in that, in terms of the advances, is that I think we do now have a number of really good frameworks for how to think about some of these issues. We, as Achusa said, for pretty much any idea you might have, we know how to put it into a framework. We know how to think about what are the risks, what are the opportunities that might arise. But I think that actually naturally leads into some of the gaps, which is we still, I think, are working at having frameworks that you can hand to somebody who doesn't have a decade of experience. I think, 10 years ago, there were not many people that you could say, how should we do this ethically or responsibly, and that they'd be able to do all that much with it. I think now, there's, I'm sure, 1,000 people in the world that you could go to them, here's an idea I have, give me a plan for how to do this ethically and responsibly, and they could generate it. But we don't need 1,000, we need 100,000. And how do we scale that out? How do we, as Francesca was saying, embed this in the cultures of organizations? Because, even in some cases, we have frameworks that work really well in a particular organizational context, but we know that they're not necessarily going to translate to a new organization. That in some companies, for example, they're really working to embed responsible AI thinking in the product teams themselves. Well, if you take that to a different kind of company, they're going to look and say, what is this person doing in our development room? And so I think having practices that can either be quickly tuned to organizational contexts or even transcend them in certain ways is really a gap we have, to be able to scale it out so that sort of it becomes just AI, not ethical or responsible. It's like you shouldn't get a bonus, blue ribbon because, ooh, you did something ethical. It should be you get a demerit for doing the unethical AI. And getting that shift is going to mean rethinking sort of the practices.
Yeah, so definitely, it's amazing the amount of work that was done since at least, 10 years ago. I remember in 2015, as you mentioned, I was at the Radcliffe Institute. We were just starting to understand what are these issues, which issue is relevant to what business model, and so on. And so now, even a little bit too much, everybody talks about these issues. In fact, there is so much. What I saw, it also brings to a gap, which is a lack of harmonization and a lack of efficiency, if you want to use this word, meaning that there is also a lot of redundancy in discussions about these issues all over the world in many different organizations. They want to bring their perspective, but not always the perspective is really a very innovative one. So there is a need for more harmonization and being able to understand that each organization has its own niche, has its own point of view, and they should be coordinated rather than sometimes repeating a little bit of the same thing. So I see that you agree. Another thing is that it's true that all these frameworks, I've been fortunate that when I joined IBM, we could start thinking about the internal governance and building a framework for that, and then making it evolve and so on. But not every company, especially small ones, startups, or even teams that are in small companies in parts of the world that maybe are less mature in terms of AI, they have the same knowledge. They have the same, lack of being in an environment that allows to spend time on these issues and building these frameworks. So like inside the Global Partnership on AI, I was leading a project where I was working with many teams all over the world, some of them in Europe, in US, but also in Africa, in India, in Mexico. And I saw the really great diversity in the maturity in AI and in responsible AI. And so that shows that really you need some way to transfer in a meaningful way these very elaborate frameworks that are usually in large companies into something that can be useful also to small teams. And then the last thing I think is related to education, since we are here in an academic environment. I like that in the fireside chat that we saw previously, one of the push was for introducing and having AI ethics in every AI team. But I would do even more. I would push for even more. First of all, I would not introduce ethics into an AI course anywhere, because usually it's at the end, between parentheses, if there is time, something like that. I would put it at the beginning. First, you have to understand what are the values that are important and the ethics considerations, and then you go technically so that you have those in mind when you go and see how to build AI technically. And second, I think that AI ethics, since AI is everywhere and this will be used by everybody, not just by the AI builders, so AI ethics should be in every other discipline. And the third one, which already was touched upon in the previous fireside chat, is the multidisciplinarity. Without my sabbatical year, where they forced me to spend time with these other people that were completely alien to me, because I was used to talk just to AI researchers, I would not have that frame of mind. And so that is very, very important for students and for builders of AI and users of AI for the future.
Thanks, Francesca. There's so many different issues that I'm like very happy that this issue about the kind of the human and organizational factors that are needed to ensure AI governance came up in, I think, in everything that you said. So there are many different things that I want to pursue, but maybe I start with this issue of frameworks that everybody mentioned. And so in thinking about how generative AI kind of might challenge some of the frameworks that we currently have, so I'm thinking like something about, like a NIST AI risk management framework, right? Like two of the things that was, I think, everybody came to consensus around that framework was the fact that the framework really prioritized the idea that AI risk management should be context sensitive and it should be process oriented. That is, like, we should look at the life cycle of the AI design, development, and deployment. And it should be throughout that entire cycle. Now, it seems to me that there's a sense in which generative AI challenges both of those things. That is, it's general purpose, so it's very difficult to know what exactly is the context of use. And the process of design, development, deployment is a little bit kind of trickier, I suppose, because there are lots of back and forth, there's fine-tuning, there's updating. So how do you think this general purpose of generative AI and the fact that this process is a little bit more complicated and complex challenges some of the best features of our previous frameworks? Maybe you started to do that, David.
Sure. I guess the first thing I'd want to do is actually push back on the way you just framed that. Generative AI systems are not general purpose. They are more general purpose, but they're not general. I mean, an LLM's not going to make me a grilled cheese sandwich. And in fact, don't follow the recipe it will give you for a grilled cheese sandwich. It's usually pretty bad. So they are more general purpose, but they're not fully general purpose. And I think the concern I have is actually less about the fact that it's more dynamic. I mean, the dynamics you're talking about of fine-tuning, that was ubiquitous in previous non-generative AI systems. It's just, and here's I think the key difference, that all happened inside a development team. It took place with people before it got thrown out into the world. And the real concern I have in many ways about generative AI is less about the general purpose, it's more about the lowering of the barriers to entry. And that's not because I'm opposed to lowering the barriers. I think it's good to democratize technology. I think it's good for communities that have been previously excluded from being able to take advantage of sophisticated computational technologies. I think it's good for them to have access to it. But that lowering of the barrier to entry has not been accompanied by the tools to actually be able to think through the ethical issues that might arise. And so you have a lot of people working with these systems. They might have the best of intentions, but they don't have the conceptual resource. They don't have the frameworks. They don't have the tools to do things in the ways that we might hope they would. I mean, I think this goes to Francesca's point about if you're that small startup and you're two people, you may not even know what questions you should be asking. And so I think the risk that I see in generative AI is less about the general purpose and more about the ease with which we can just drop these into everything, even if we shouldn't be dropping them into everything.
Yeah, another related thing is that I would see, I mean, for example, IBM business model is different from business model of other companies because we sell our AI-based solutions to other companies. So that means that for us, generative AI is not like a large language model and an API, and you can ask questions about everything. Is going to be used as a foundation model, what sometimes large language models are called, to build downstream models with the data coming from a specific company to do a specific task, but with the basis of the large language model, and then you build on top. That means that the people that are going to use these final solutions are people that you can train because you know who they are. They're not just generic population all over the world. And they're not asking any question. They are asking questions related to that solution because that company asked us to produce. So that is a different way of using this more general kind of AI to be general enough to give the fluency of the language and some capabilities on building language models and even some form of word models, very limited, but also to be really very specific and responsive to a specific task with downstream data and models. So that's one thing that, another thing is that when people talk about risks of general purpose AI, usually they talk about systemic risks, intrinsic risks, which when I go deep, I tend to fail to understand what they are because to me the risk only come when you know where you're going to use this system, so when you know the use case. In fact, in IBM, we don't have an AI risk internal use process, but we have a use case risk assessment process. So to say that without knowing how the technology is going to be used, where and by whom, then it's very difficult to evaluate the risks.
I just want to add something to what David said because I think that's such an important kind of like point, but with referring to some like personal examples. So I was working for a while at Air Canada. We were developing some softwares for scheduling of pilots, co-pilots, a very mundane problem. We were using a specific type of like mixed integer programming approach for modeling and resolving the scheduling problem. The same kind of technology has been used across a variety of different decision-making problems. You could develop a robot that is doing mixed integer programming when it wants to navigate a space and schedule, and you could just resolve all types of planning scheduling problem with the same type of mathematical computational technology. So there's this very interesting question of like, well, look, we had all of these algorithms that we could apply across a variety of different domains. So all of AI algorithmic systems, in some sense, have been general purpose. But just tying that back to what Sina said, seems like there is something unique, though. It is true that like all AI systems are general purpose to some degree, but it seems like a foundation model, like a term that some institutions use, foundation model, some other institutions didn't like, then they kind of like replace that term with general purpose model. Seems like there is one big model that you can use, one big model that, let's say, Google DeepMind develops or OpenAI develops or open source community develops, and you can use exactly the same model to process a variety of different data across a variety of modalities and then apply that to a variety of different domains. So there is something unique about this general aspect of general purpose AI, but what exactly is that? I think that's an open question.
Great, thanks. So each of you highlighted the different set of risks that's kind of, I suppose, I don't know whether it keeps you awake, but keeps you busy during the day, or maybe at night if you work during nighttime. So this question is about the kind of the priority or mechanisms of governance for prioritizing attention to certain risks. So, I mean, anybody who's worked in this field, I mean, we know that this field is sometimes called AI ethics, sometimes called responsible AI, sometimes called trustworthy AI, called AI safety, AI security now, I think, and now AI opportunities. Each of these terms, of course, highlights and picks out certain different types of concerns, whether it's risk or opportunities. and certain different ways of allocating attention or setting priorities. So my question to you is that, and maybe this time we start with Francesca, how do you think we as a society should responsibly allocate attention or maybe set priorities with respect to the risks or maybe opportunities of responsible AI, given all of these different potential priorities that could be in tension with each other? And how could we build on the capabilities of the different types of stakeholders, whether it's government, industry, academia, and so on?
Well, my experience, I mean, a company should reason internally about its own values and what it wants to give to its clients in terms of maintaining the trust of the clients and over time. And IBM, among all the AI companies, I think it has shown because we are older than all the other ones, 111 years. So, and you have to maintain these values. So reasoning internally, but with the discussion with the various stakeholders to share experience, share best practices, learn from others, especially others, from other stakeholders in society. Of course, what the government attitude in each part of the world, and a global company sees that there are different attitudes in different parts of the world, even though we have the same AI ethics and governance framework, and the way we judge internally the various use cases, whether they are in Japan or in Europe or in the US, or it's the same, but we see that there is a different attitude in various parts of the world. And so the government really influences, with the regulation, with the attitude. But even without the government, I have to say that the culture of the different places is different. And it gives different priorities to different values, like how much you value personal privacy compared to societal security. Or, that's not the same weights and priority level that are given everywhere in the world, independently of the kind of administration that you have. So that means that much more discussion, and it's to say that one wants to. It would be great to achieve the same priority. I think is utopic. Because, not only, again, because governments have different attitude, one more on regulation, one less, but because the culture of the people there is different. So I think that what needs to be done is really to work with your culture, understand the values of that community, and build this AI system. For example, Atusha mentioned open source. Open source, to me, is a good way to build this general AI system that can be tuned to the needs of a specific community, because you can scrutinize them better, you can add and see vulnerabilities of things that are not aligned to your specific values, and then make them aligned. Add your own data and make your culture and your community be more relevant for that, because we know that one of the kind of bugs, not because somebody made a mistake, but one of the not fully positive things about large language models is that they put everything together. And of course, some cultures on the web are more represented, some others are less represented, so you put everything together, but then some less represented cultures go and use this large language model, and if you're just a passive user, you get what there is. So it's very important to build the AI system in a way that can be tuned to the different cultures.
Yeah, so I think we need to, let's say a student who is going to get graduated from CMU, I hope that they have a very good understanding of all types of risk. It's not that they want to invest, but they need to kind of learn when they hear about extinction risk from AI, why some people put this idea forward. Is this completely like a sci-fi story, or is there a way to pay attention to that? And I'm not saying that there is like a like a very clear answer to the question of whether we should talk about extinction risk or not. But just like ignoring some categories of risk, I think actually is going to harm the society at large in like dealing as a collective entity for managing and mitigating risk of harm from AI. So I think the kind of like educational aspect of understanding, thinking about all types of risks is actually quite very important. But then the question of like how much we should invest or how should we prioritize depends on what do you mean by we. So if there is a specific company that is developing specific kind of technologies for specific purposes, of course, as Francesca mentioned, they're going to focus on the risks that are being touched by their specific technologies. But if there is a company that is going to say, I'm going to develop a technology that will benefit all of humanity and the whole planet, then they need to have like a very clear and deep understanding of like, what do you mean by risk of harm to all people on the planet? Are you really addressing them, or are you like prioritizing, right? So it really depends on which entity wants to really kind of like do research in this risk. But in general, I think it's very important to have a deep, pluralistic understanding of all kinds of risks and to have various different specialized entities, whether governmental, company-based, university-based, that like study this risk in a very good level of detail and analysis.
Yeah, I mean, I think an underlying theme in all of this is that the creation of any new technology, but especially a new AI system, is fundamentally a small p political process. I don't necessarily mean political in the sense of at the government level or in DC, but political in the sense of there need to be processes in place such that everybody involved is able to endorse the final decision about where we end up, even if it's not the one they would personally have preferred, right? I can endorse that I have to pay my taxes, even though I wish tax policy were different in this country, for example. And so I think when we think of it that way, then suddenly all of these questions are, all right, who is the community that should be, again, in this small p political way, engaged? What are the values that we're trying to trade off? What are the processes that are in place, whether it's just talking to people in the community, whether it's getting them involved in co-design? What are the ways that we can ensure that there actually has been an appropriate process for deciding which values are going to get prioritized in the creation of the AI system? And for anyone who might be thinking, well, AI systems are just technology, it's just code, there's no values being prioritized. Every time you have a choice where you go, I could do it this way, I could do it that way, that's a place that values are coming in the development of a technology. If the math doesn't compel, well, then you're prioritizing one set of values or another, which if you're a student in this room, start thinking about that every time you're building something in one of your classes, even if it's a straight CS class. You're actually making a lot of value choices when you create a project, even when you think it's just a coding project. Anytime you could do it differently, that means you prioritized one value over another.
Great, and I think this is a good time to turn to some of the questions that have been coming about the audience, from the audience, because they fall under this category broadly. As I wonder why. As we talk about the different players in this field. So I suppose one question, the way that it seems to me, is about maybe the new organizational responsibilities that emerge because of the technologies. So the question directly is, who is responsible for retraining employees and professionals who lose their jobs or whose position changes significantly due to AI? Where do those responsibilities fall?
Should I? Okay. So education is important, as I said, but really education is not just at the college or university level or even before that, but goes on forever, of course, because people need to have the possibility to be maintaining their agency with using these tools, like AI tools, in their job that will be more and more used. Before they were used in some scenarios, now they're using to create content. So that means that whenever you create content, especially text-based content, you can use, and in the future probably you will use, everybody, AI-based tools. So that means that people need to be trained and have the skills to be able to use it in the most responsible way, in a way that they are not left out, because even if the human is in the loop, meaning that is the final decision maker, it has to be given the possibility to make an informed decision. So that means that the AI system needs to be built in a way that the human is kept upskilled and not just just given a recommendation with no explanation, and then what can the human do? If the human in general trusts AI, then it will follow. If the human doesn't, it will reject. So, but in any case, that's not an informed decision. So that's really important, and this is the responsibility of every company to really make sure that the internal use of AI, but all its professionals inside the company, is done in this informed way, so that people can, make good decisions with AI.
I think one of the things that does keep me up at night, not all of the risks that we've mentioned, but one that does keep me up at night is, we have a lot of programs, processes, learned knowledge as a society and as government about how to retrain people and how to adapt to job changes and job loss. This is not the first technological innovation that is going to put people, that is going to end or dramatically transform job categories. It's just not. But historically, and apologies, but this is going to be a little bit weird to say, but please bear with me. If 500,000 people lose their jobs over a 20-year span, that's a tragedy for that 500,000 people. It absolutely is, and we need to do something as society to help those people. But society can be resilient to that. We've had it happen enough times. We know we can be resilient to that. What happens when 500,000 people lose their jobs in 20 months or in 20 weeks? What happens when an entire sector of employment, advertising, loses 90% of the jobs in a year? And those are the kinds of numbers that are not unreasonable to expect with what's happening in technology right now. We don't know what to do with that. We do not have anything in place that can handle that. Our standard ways of doing upskilling and retraining as a society just don't work at that scale and at that speed. And so I think we need to be really trying to get out ahead, if possible, in trying to come up with innovative new ways to respond to the fact that we may see very large-scale job dislocation in a way that I don't think we know yet what to do. And that definitely keeps me up at night, because that's a real shock to the system that we don't know how to handle.
Yeah, I think I want to add also maybe like a complementary solution or proposal for this question. And that's the fact that the citizens need to be aware that they have to retrain themselves. And when we look online, most citizens have access to internet. There are a variety of different really, really, really good quality free courses, free videos. So everyone needs to be aware that sooner or later they need to adjust to various different degrees. And so they also need to be proactive in learning about or retraining themselves. And again, there are many different resources out there. So maybe then the idea there is just to raise the awareness among various different citizens. And they also would start, in a bottom-up approach, starting from themselves, going to do the retraining. And again, the quality of some of the free material online is so shocking how great some of these materials are. And so we can also leverage some of the materials that are already out there for retraining purposes.
So I hear a mixture of bottom-up and top-down approaches, both proactive, because this change is going to be substantial. So this question is particularly for Francesca. Again, it's I think about the values and how it fits into our thinking about generative AI. So the question is, again, from the audience, how do the climate considerations of AI fit into the agile governance framework, especially the power intensity of Gen AI, or does it not fit?
Yeah, in fact, one of the 17 chapters of this report that was recently published is about AI and sustainability, and it addresses two dimensions of the relationship between AI and sustainability, because it goes in two directions. No? So AI, of course, is data hungry and therefore resource hungry to train over those data, and now not just to train, but also the inference part. But on the other hand, AI can also help in analyzing large quantities of data that can be useful to understand how to better address the climate emergency. So there are these two directions. So definitely that impact on environment is something that is being considered, but I think that some dimension that is missing in the general discussion is that usually is a discussion thinking about that does not distinguish between the global impact and the local impact. Of course, when you build a data center in a town or with that is very large data center that consumes a lot of resources and energy and water, that local community will feel the impact a lot. But globally, the numbers that have been put together by several studies show that globally is not a very big impact. It's an impact like watching TV or other activities that we do that require resources. So the point is not just the global impact, but also the local impact on the specific communities where you build these very resource-hungry data centers or training centers.
Thank you. And we have just a few more minutes? Okay. So then the last answer very briefly. I kind of want to go back to something, DJ is not here, to something that DJ was saying in terms of what is it that 3 years from now, if we look back, we say, oh, I'm happy that we started doing that. So in this context of generative AI ethics and ethical governance, and in different sectors, whether it's academia and education or industry or our role as citizens, what is it that you think AI researchers or practitioners, it's a good thing to start doing now, and they would be happy in 3 years looking back, say, oh, that was a good decision?
Where do you want us to start?
Should I put you on the spot?
Sure, you can put me on the spot. I think in 3 years, I think we're going to wonder, it's going to be, did responsible AI, ethical considerations, whatever term you prefer, did that go the way of cybersecurity, or did that go the way of user experience and user interfaces? Cybersecurity became about compliance. It's siloed off from the development of the product. It becomes, in some companies, it's just a cost you pay. Yeah, you're going to get hacked every once in a while, whatever. That's just the price of business. I'm old enough to remember when we as coders thought we could build interfaces and be good at it. And then the mantra of you are not your user sort of spread. And it became now no serious company would ever dream of building a product without user experience and user interface people just integrated into every step of the process, as opposed to an after the fact compliance legal framing. And I think we're at a bit of a crux right now. I don't know which way it's going to go. I can see in 3 years that responsible AI becomes this siloed off checklist thing that's in many companies. I can also see that we end up where in most companies it's just, of course you do that. What company would be foolish enough not to have this? And I really, I hope it's the latter, and I fear it will be the former.
Yeah, I think just a very short answer. I think the companies are built of people, and so if people embody the ethos of responsible AI research in a deep and multidimensional way, the visions of the company in the long run, in my view, would go towards responsible AI development deployment. So we need to kind of like have more and more people that really get to the roots of AI, responsible AI research. They have a deep understanding of it. It's not that they just jump on a specific topic, read 2 papers, and they call themselves experts. No, they are very deeply like engraved into this whole field. And then I think the future could be bright.
Yeah, so I'm kind of along these lines, to have really to understand that AI, I always say AI does not come from Mars, meaning that AI is not some asteroid that is going to, hit us and, oh my God, what are we going to do? We are building it. We are responsible for making sure that is built and is used and deployed in a way that is supporting the progress of humanity, the growth of people and the communities. So we maybe rather than talking about AI risks, is like, let's take responsibility. We have to make AI in a way that really we think is beneficial. So this more proactive and less passive attitude towards a technology.
So seeing AI not as a natural object or as a myth, but as a designed artifact that develops in a particular culture.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. This was a great conversation. Please join me in thanking the panelists. And if I understand correctly, lunch is served outside, but then we have to come back inside because there will be very interesting and great presentations by the lightning presentations, yeah, by the students. Thank you.